My dear, dear friend, Ernest, by the time you will have received this message, several things may have happened to me, all of which I doubt I shall not know the exact outcome, except, of course, I fathom it will be something quite unpleasant. I shall suddenly disappear or be found, well, I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. It all began, actually, about 6 months ago. As you already know, I moved to the Kingston area from Virginia. About the very same time, I had visited you in those earlier times, if you remember. And the area simply overwhelmed me. The Hudson, the trees, houses, everything was just so beautiful. Even the quaint town, or should I say city, the countryside, it was just magnificent. The sunrises and the sunsets, the fresh air, I loved it. I loved all of it. I had fallen in love with the entire area, and finally I decided to move to the area from Virginia to the Catskills, what we call Kingston. At first it was quite a decision to make, leaving Virginia and my job, that is, but one only lives once, right, Ernest? So I quit my job of assistant professor at the university and engrossed myself with all of my personal desires, painting. Then, about a year later, I heard about this magnificent house for sale. I could not resist the temptation, so I moved, lock, stock, and barrel. I collected my retirement money and purchased the house. Then I settled down in this lovely town of Kingston, New York. I settled down somewhat to indulge myself with personal necessities, my work. I am, as best can be described, an artist of sorts. I had been a painter for the most part of my earlier life, although recently I've begun to learn the art of writing. I settled down and tried to write some ghost stories. The adorable house I had purchased overlooked the Hudson. The house consisted of 3 stories. It had a wonderful and workable floor plan. One room in particular, the garret, or attic if you prefer. It would serve as my personal den. The first floor was nicely spaced too, and I would eventually use it as a studio. The second floor I had spaced out in my mind to serve for my basic needs, primarily a living area, sleeping chamber, and of course a kitchen. I was more than quite fortunate too, for I didn't have to secure any furniture for the house. The house came completely furnished, and with the furniture that was bought by the original owners. Oh yes, by the way, the house was originally constructed in around 1870. And the last owner somehow mysteriously left the house in around 1918, or someplace around that time. This was my second time visiting the structure, only this time I was the resident and the owner. I was elated beyond description. I entered the house with cheerfulness and a desire for good tidings. Several months later, I settled down to do some serious writing. I had been lucky enough to have sold a few ghost stories to a local publishing house. Thereby, with the income from my writing, I could devote the majority of my time to writing, trying, of course, to promote the best of all atmospheres in the quest of fulfilling the necessary stimuli that will permit me to function on the level that I so desperately desire. There is something quite overpowering about the climate in this area. It encompasses a total antithesis to certain undeniable profundities. My feelings are singular in their approach to atmospheric conditioning, punctuated, of course, by the correlation of three entities: mind, weather, and the supernatural. Starting out for my daily walk, and I may add, I possess a fetish of sorts for graveyards of all things. Do not ask me to explain it, I cannot. Besides, there is something extremely quaint and sincere about being in a place of silence and solitude. No one to bother you, just peacefulness of mind and character. I walked for miles and miles that day, seemingly. Even though the threat of rain loomed overhead, I continued my walk. Then, I suddenly came across an antiquated, overrun, and forgotten graveyard. I entered. Strolling along at a very slow pace, I began to read the inscriptions. I continued my vigilance through the old graveyard. Then I saw it. A headstone, all alone, sitting far off from the rest, and I wondered why. The thing was without care. I looked closer at the name. It had a name, but it was hard to read. There were other names, too, or a name, and Vordelak and Tompkins. Strange name. Vordelak. I wondered what it might mean. Surely it was not a person's name. I proceeded to copy onto paper those two words, Tompkins and Vordelak. As I finished writing the names down, the threat of rain, again, as I said before, was looming even more so. So I decided to leave for home, wondering, of course, what in the world did the word Vordelak mean? And Tompkins. Why was this one gravestone set apart from the rest? I did not know the answers. Not then, anyway. The very next day, Thursday, I began my inquiry into the mysterious circumstances I had chanced upon. I walked about Kingston, asking various people if they were familiar with the name of Tompkins. Perhaps it was a family that had lived a long time ago in the area, a family that, well, had lived here many, many, many years ago. But to no avail. Everyone that I asked, all replies were the same. All were negative ones. I continued my search. After several days of inquiring, I had almost given up any hope of ever finding an answer to my quest. But I continued anyway. I had searched all over town, both high and low. Funny. Funny in that some of the older people that had asked seemed somewhat fearful of the name of Tompkins. For what reason, I'm not quite certain. There did, however, seem to be a kind of hidden fear, a communication of some dreadful secrecy. I was somewhat at a loss, so I finally went straight home and filled my mind with other things. As I directed myself homeward, still searching for the elusive Tompkins, I could not but marvel at my surroundings. The area was just simply beautiful. Beautiful. Actually, it was offsetting my bad luck in not being able to find an answer to my quest.
My quest? What was my quest? This Tompkins incident was really getting the better of me. I did not know what Waterlap meant, nor did I know anything more than I did before about this Tompkins and this headstone. It was beyond me.
The next day, Sunday, I thought I would relieve some of my tension by presenting myself with the task at hand, cleaning out and relocating articles in the cellar. I accidentally came upon a book of sorts, a book that was wedged between the rocks in the wall. It was a diary of sorts, or some kind of journal of events. Needless to say, I was quite enthusiastic about finding the diary. I might add, I was quite curious about what it may contain. Upon examining the diary more closely, I found out, indeed, it truly was a diary. There were some very strange entries that were made, mostly about children, a wife, I presume, and the most curious of all, some strange presence that was being felt in the house. I wondered what they meant by that. There were other entries, too. Some trivial and others not so trivial. Of this, I felt somewhat quite guilty about reading someone else's diary, but I might add, the contents of the diary were extremely interesting. Written were quotes like, "Feel quite weak lately. Energy seems to be gone. Strange noises at night. Been having bad dreams." Then, upon tiring of reading the diary, I closed the book. But in doing so, I saw the name was Tompkins. Tompkins, the same name that was on the headstone. I read the diary all through the night and well into the next day. Some of the entries were quite profound. It was as though I could actually hear Tompkins himself.
Wednesday, June 12th, 1912. Dull and rainy all day yesterday, but rain needed very badly. Windy, but not cold. Poor little Johnny Nathan died today. Quickly, to Dr. Gates. With sewers on face. Writing, I thought I heard a noise coming from downstairs. I investigated. Hello? Anyone there?
The following, I had gathered, were excerpts of what I considered to be his final entries, for I could find no further information. I must confess to my strange malady. After being awakened, I washed.
After having awakened the next morning, I washed and shaved, as I normally do each morning. As I prepared to make my bed, I noticed a singular spot on my pillow. Upon closer examination, I recognized the spot to be that of blood. Blood? But how and whose? I searched myself for fresh cuts, but to no avail. There were none. Strange. Yes, very strange indeed. Went to breakfast this morning. Very strange. My coffee, which I have a passion for, tasted extremely bitter. So much so, I found I could not stand the taste of it. Even more strangely, I also found
much to my dismay, that my food tasted quite peculiar. Even at that, I must admit, I felt no hunger for the taste of food. So I simply sat and contemplated my strange and sudden malady. Beautiful day, Thursday, July the 24th. Miss Baker has taken the girls on a picnic to the woods. I can't seem to have a peaceful or restful night's sleep. I'm quite restless all the time.
The last entry, to my knowledge, and the end of the mystery, so I thought. Then I noticed a piece of newspaper wedged between the pages of the diary. Withdrawing the paper, I read the contents. Quote, "This makes the 8th child missing in the past 4 weeks." My next stop was to go to the public library. I needed to look through some old newspapers. Hopefully, I would find something on the name of Tompkins. I walked into the library with great anticipation, wondering about the great mystery. I walked to the desk and inquired about certain microfilm. Little had I realized it, but this day I would have spent many long and tedious hours looking at many microfilms. I went through hours of microfilm dating back to the early 1800s. I was trying desperately to find some tangible clues between the name Tompkins and the mysterious headstone I had encountered upon. Finally, I found several interesting items about Henry Tompkins. Henry had been a sea captain who had retired. He had been married and had had 3 children, all of whom were suddenly stricken with some unknown disease and died. Henry's wife, Meredith, died quite suddenly upon returning from their Central European vacation. The children, 2 girls and a boy, died a few months later. The house, which was built in the 1800s by James Holcomb, was purchased by Captain Henry Tompkins about 1907. After the death of his family, Henry became somewhat of a recluse, keeping entirely to himself. The word was that he seldom, very seldom, went out of the house, and that he received no visitors whatsoever. Then, about a half year later, Captain Henry Tompkins suddenly and mysteriously disappeared. The day had changed considerably. It had become cloudy, foggy, and rain finally came late in the evening. I was tired, very tired. After going through so many hours of searching, I was exhausted, fatigued, mentally fatigued. I took my clothes off, and I simply fell across the bed and slept.
Nee. Oui? Du Restaurant?
That night, I had a most unusual and unnatural nightmare, one that I never want to experience again. I made breakfast out of habit, for I really and truly did not feel hungry. My coffee, it tasted very bitter, so much so I couldn't drink it. For the life of me, I simply could not understand my sudden distaste for food and for liquids. My dear, dear friend Ernest, by the time you will have received this message, several things may have happened to me, all of which I shall not know the exact outcome. Except, of course, I fathom it will be something quite unpleasant. I shall either suddenly disappear or be found... Well, Ernest, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me try once again. I was becoming completely annoyed with this Tompkins affair. Thus, the next evening, I decided to do something for myself. I decided to read for my own enjoyment.
As I sat, I suddenly thought I had heard a door opening and closing. Must have been my imagination. There it goes again. Sunset. It's all ready here. I'm alone, sitting and waiting for it to return. Again, I do not know how all of this will end, but I hope that by the grace of God, all will be well for me. By the way, Ernest, the word Vodalak, it means vampire.